Welcome back. I'm Leah Wilson, and today I am joined by Phil Sarnecki, a candidate for Kansas's next governor. So thank you so much, Phil, for joining me today to talk about your race.
Thanks, Leah. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And you have been a candidate that has brought one of the most popular issues for voters today into the governor's race. And that issue is health freedom. I mean, there are polls going out there that show that 80% of people transcending party lines, transcending socioeconomic status, really want government and insurance companies out of their healthcare decisions. And so I'd love to hear from you. What was it that first brought you into the conversation of health freedom, or what brought health freedom to your attention?
Yeah, thanks for the question, and thanks again for all the work you guys are doing too. I don't know that there was one, big major event. I think it's, just between my wife Heidi and I, just who we are, our faith. I think as a somebody interested in politics, I believe in liberty, I believe in freedom, and I believe that, the family and parents should ultimately have control over themselves, their own families, their own children, and the decisions that they make. And so, again, I don't know that there was one big event. I mean, I will say, our oldest daughter she's in her mid 20s now, but she was vaccinated. And my wife, and I remember this very distinctly, probably within 4 to 5 months, commented that she noticed a difference. Like, she noticed a difference in her. And so I know that was, if there was an event, that probably was it. But I think it's just as we've learned through the years, what we've gone through, a lot of reading, a lot of studying, talking to people. And, so that's just kind of brought us where we are today.
Yes, and I know that, that's one of the most common reasons that people enter this conversation is they feel let down by what should have been informed consent. Like, oh, I wasn't aware this was a potential outcome of this health decision. And so I'm
Sure.
sure maybe that's part of what you and your wife felt was we weren't made aware that this was a potential outcome. And having to dig for that information yourself really changes how we do health in America.
Well, and it's not only, I think there are also pockets of it. I mean, that's kind of the nice version that you just gave. Hey, you're not aware of it. But there's also a version of they're trying to hide things from you. They're trying to hide the outcomes from you. It's all about money. And they know there are these dangers that are out there. And when you find that out after the fact, that's really disturbing.
And normalizing the fallout is what seems most fraudulent a lot of the time. Oh, you're going to normalize that our children no longer speak until age 2, or that kids lose words after gaining them. And parents are catching on that we need to be intentional about every intervention. And I think that's one of the reasons health freedom is front and center in this election cycle, the 2026 midterms, and in the 36 governor races happening across the US. I also heard a story that you were a part of a birthday party during COVID and kicked out because you refused to wear a mask. Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, it was my youngest daughter, who's now a sophomore in high school. So I'm trying to think, I'm not sure how old she was. I guess in one way, there's a piece of it that you're proud about, defying the resistance and the establishment. I don't know if getting kicked out of my youngest daughter's, birthday party was the best, but it just shows you how little common sense was happening. So we were at a large hotel. I won't mention the name, but large hotel establishment. It wasn't that I mean, I typically, obviously I didn't wear a mask if at all, unless I was just literally almost tied down and, put on, because I knew what the scam that it was. So anyway, I was on the phone and I was 40 yards from anybody. I walked way away, had my mask down, and some manager, she comes barreling towards me from like 40 yards away. No one's around me. And she comes up and she's got her fingers, she's like, "Sir, you've got to put on your mask." And I said, listen, I'm on the phone. I said, nobody's close to me other than you who just walked 40 yards across it just shows how insane it was. I said, and I told her, I said, listen, when I get off the phone, I come back, I'll put the ridiculous mask back on just to make you feel good. And next thing I know, like she's got her boss, and then, they basically come up and say, you're going to have to leave. You're going to have to leave. And then the police came to our room, our hotel room, to escort me out. Now, I will defend the police because they thought it was ridiculous as well. Like both of the guys that came were like, listen, we're really sorry. We got it. And so, yeah, I was escorted out of my youngest daughter's birthday party.
And by that time you were in your hotel room.
I was back in my hotel room and they came and got me. I mean, it just, again, the whole thing, we just lost all sense of reason and common sense. And it kind of applies to that. My first experience with the mask was actually out on the East Coast, and masks kind of hadn't made their way here yet. And I walked into this restaurant where there was almost, again, nobody there, maybe a couple people at the bar and a couple people at a far off table. And the lady up front said, sir, do you have a mask? And I said, no, I don't have a mask. And she says, well, you're going to need to put one on. And I looked at her and I said, wasn't that going to make it a little difficult to eat? And she didn't sense the humor in that. And she said, you need to put this on. And I said, what? She said, you can take it off to eat. And I said, wait a minute, let me get this straight. I said, where's my table? And she pointed about 10 feet from where we were standing. I said, so I'm going to put this mask on. I'm going to walk 10 feet to that table. I'm going to take it off for the next hour and shove food and drink into my mouth. And then you want me to put it back on and then walk out again. And she literally looked at me and said, yes. And I thought, people have lost their minds. I mean, they've just absolutely lost their minds here.
And it's fascinating. I had a similar experience on the East Coast. It was June of 2020. So
Okay.
it was before you were forced to wear a mask to get on an airplane. You know what I mean? There came a time when you could not fly without a mask. And, my boys would get on the plane and then hide under a blanket as if it were a tent to remove their masks for flights. And it was a fellow passenger that accosted me, that literally took me by the arms and dragged me to security. And I had the same experience you did, just being out there where it wasn't quite as aggressive in the Midwest yet, and thinking, by God, we have entered interesting times. It seems that the government spreading fear is probably one of the only things that could catapult us into that sort of environment. And so what does it look like for, in Kansas right now, you're in this race with a crowded race to be the next governor. What would you expect to see out of leadership in Kansas that you aren't seeing today?
Well, Governor Kelly was actually the first governor in the country to shut down schools during COVID. And I was actually on a school reopening task force for my kids. There were like 5 of us on this task force. And I remember I kind of got in this argument with this doctor, and she didn't want to open the schools. And I said, listen, the schools in Europe have been open for months and they're not getting COVID, those kids, at any higher rate than what we're getting it here. I said, why don't we just look at the empirical evidence? Again, to me, it's like, let's apply some common sense. The kids over there aren't going to be any different than the kids here. And she just, again, got all angry and frustrated. And fortunately, my position won and we were able to reopen the schools. But what people would get from me as governor is they would give freedom. They would get choices. I mean, listen, if somebody wants to go and get vaccinated, God bless them, go get your vaccine shot if you want to get it. But what I don't want to see is people, being mandated to get it. That will never happen under my watch. I don't want people to get gaslit, that they're doing something bad for their family, et cetera. And so people are going to have freedom. They're going to have choices. And that's what, that's why I'm really running. I mean, I've never run for office before. And, but we needed somebody who wasn't of the establishment of what you're talking about. The people I'm running against have been in office for well over 100 years. And we have all kinds of issues in Kansas and they haven't solved the problems. And I just believe that wasn't going to get solved by somebody from the inside. It's going to take somebody from the outside that comes in with a totally different perspective on how to do things and how to run things. And that's really what I've been doing. I've been running businesses, my companies for over 30 years. And so that's what, we'll bring to the table as governor in Kansas.
What do you think, coming from the outside, what do you think has best prepared you for the governor's position, for that executive role in Kansas?
Yeah, not being in politics, not being part of the establishment. I think it's a whole perspective on how you look at things. But I had a conversation. I'm in a CEO group with the former governor of Virginia, Glenn Youngkin, and I was talking to Glenn summer of 2024, and he made this comment to me where he said, "Philip," he goes, the governor's job is unlike any other political job," and he said it's a CEO job. And if you think of all the things that you do as a governor, he said that's exactly the skill set that you've been using for the last 30 plus years running your companies. And, that really struck me because we had lost in Kansas in a pretty red state. I mean, we're the longest running state in the country, for example, without a Democratic senator. We haven't had a Democratic senator in Kansas in almost 100 years, but we've had a liberal Democratic governor for the last 7 years. And it's also a state President Trump won 3 times by double-digit margin. Matter of fact, he won by 14, 16, and 21%. And yet we're sitting here with a liberal Democratic governor. And so Glenn and I, we were talking about this, and he said, well, I don't pay a whole lot of attention to Kansas politics, but it sounds to me like you've taken legislators in 2018 and 22, and you've tried to make executives out of them. And I said, that's exactly what we've done. And he kind of joked and said, it's called the executive branch for a reason. So that whole skill set, I think, when you're running a $26 billion annual budget as the CEO of the state, you're building leadership teams, you're appointing people, you're finding efficiencies, which you have to do in business to run a profitable business. I don't get the luxury, I call luxury, that the career politicians get, where if they overspend or they don't run an efficient operation, i.e. government, they just go back to the taxpayers and ask for more. We just want more. We're the highest tax state of every state in our region from an income tax standpoint, and we have the second highest corporate tax of every state in our region too. And our property taxes are totally out of control in the state of Kansas. So the people that I'm running against cumulatively have had over 100 years to solve these problems, and they haven't done it. And so that's what we're going to bring to the table as governor.
It's fascinating because even non-career politicians get into certain government races, they enter office, and then they recognize everyone's coming to you to solve their problems, that they're looking to you to say, look, Phil, we have a mental health crisis. You have to fix it. Look, Phil, we have a farming crisis. You have to fix it. And
Right.
as a CEO, like, how do you triage what's yours to fix and what isn't? And one of the biggest excuses we hear out of even well-respected governors or leaders in the state house is that it's the federal government's job to lead, or the feds are going to do something. Let's just watch and wait. In the health freedom movement, we've heard that a lot over the past couple months is, well, let's just wait and see what happens with HHS. So as a CEO, how would you triage? What is yours to fix?
Yeah, great question. Well, I'm a federalist. I believe the states created the federal government, not the other way around. And I do believe the states need to lead on this. We know one of the brilliant things of our founding fathers, of which there's many, of course, but is that states as incubators, if you will. The states can try things on a smaller scale, and that's how we can lead. And we do need to get out front on these issues as the CEOs, i.e. the governors of our states. So, it's a really good point. I've had people bring up, like, how are you going to create jobs as the governor? Well, let me be very clear. The government doesn't create jobs, okay? But what the government can do is, cut the regulations. We struggle with new business startups in the state of Kansas. We're near the bottom, statistically around the country. So we need to reduce regulations. We can do that. We can get the obstacles and the barriers out of the way to allow entrepreneurs and investors and business leaders to do what they're gifted to do. And if we can do that and kind of stay out of the way, and build a structure, an infrastructure, if you will, that attracts people to the state, then we're going to be in really good shape. Kansas has phenomenal people. It's the greatest asset we have, just kind of those good old Midwest values, hard work, and so if we can do that, Kansas is going to be in a dramatically better place 8 years from now.
It's interesting because deregulation is definitely a huge key to unleashing freedom, to unleashing the economy, especially the local economy, unsaddling those red tape that a new entrepreneur would have to jump through. But then there's this other side where people are using that same argument to leave individuals not protected from corporate control. So what and people might not understand this, but one of the ways we show that or see that pop up is even in individual healthcare decisions when a parent disagrees with what a school is recommending for a child's ADD, or when a parent disagrees with what a doctor is recommending for an acute infection or something of that nature. So, what do you see as the intersect between the government's job to care for Kansas's children and the parents' job to care for their own children?
Well, I don't, other than really extreme, situations, a child's being abused or whatever, I don't think it's the government's job at all to make those decisions. It's the parents' job to make those decisions. And I am always going to lean very, very heavily on the side of the parents and the family, to make those decisions. And, the thing you learn about government is, and I've learned this just in the last 5.5 6 months that I've been running, and I've been in this race, is, and I hate to say this, but people become corrupt. It's the big money. They want to stay in office. I mean, I'd be all in favor of term limits in our state. I mean, obviously the governor does have term limits, but even for our state house and our state senate, because I think people would make better decisions if they're not trying to get reelected all the time. Because when you're trying to get reelected, then you're trying to satisfy, the corporations and the big donors, and then you end up bought and paid for. You really do. And I think that's one of the attractions of an outsider like myself. I mean, we're certainly raising a lot of money from individuals, but Heidi and I are putting in a lot of money ourselves. And so I think this whole idea that, hey, you can't be bought and paid for, that's one of the things that attracted people to President Trump, for example. And I think that same thing is happening. We're seeing that here in Kansas in a big, big way.
Yeah. So, what would day one in office look like for you? What do you hope to bring to Kansas?
Yeah, there's going to be fundamental change. Kansas is a turnaround operation right now. This isn't something where we need to get in and nibble around the edges. So we have a long list of things, executive orders that we could do quickly, where we could come in. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to bring in an independent outside auditor to audit every single department and every single agency in the state government. And we want to put that out there so the people of the state of Kansas can see it. We want to expose it. We want people to know where their tax dollars are being spent and where their tax dollars are going, because that right there will help with a lot of the fraud and the waste. When we started this race, just kind of a really high level look at it, we were guessing there's probably about $1 billion or so of waste in the state government. We have about a $26 billion total budget, not just the general fund, but the total budget. And now, about 6 months into the race, we're convinced it's way more than $1 billion. There's so much money being wasted, Kansas taxpayer dollars. So we're going to come in and we're going to, turn over every rock we can to find it. And the other thing I'm going to do on the first day is a lot of prayer, for a lot of prayer for wisdom on making good decisions and leading the state of Kansas.
Your race will be won in the primary. And a lot of people don't realize that when you care about a specific issue, when you show up at the polls, you better be engaged in that primary race, because that is where grassroots races are won, is the primary elections. So tell us about when your race is coming up and how do people find out more about your campaign and how to get involved?
Yeah, thank you. No, and I agree with you. The primary is critical. We have, like you said, we have a large primary. I would say there's really maybe 3 or 4 candidates. One of the local papers in Topeka basically said there were 5 main candidates, and thankfully me being one of them. And so involvement in the primary is critical. We're seeing enormous grassroots energy. I mean, people are so tired of career politicians. We actually did a poll, my team did a poll as I was getting into the race, and it was a large 800 person, likely Republican primary voters in the state of Kansas. And it was 54 questions. And one of the questions was, do you prefer your next governor in Kansas to be an outside business leader, or do you prefer them to be an experienced, established politician? And it was the outside business leader, which probably doesn't surprise a lot of people. But what did surprise us was the number, because we thought it might be 55, 60%. It was actually 83% of those polled wanted their next Kansas governor to be an outside business leader. We're tapping into that energy. I'm the only outsider. I'm the only business leader, CEO. I mean, I have more business experience. Well, I started my first business at 19 years old in college. So I think I had more business experience by the time I graduated from college than everybody else I'm running against combined. But anyway, they can, if people are interested, they can go to philipsarnecki.org. Pretty simple. Obviously, money is critically important in races. So even if it's $50, $100, 500, 250, I mean, anything moves the needle. Campaigns are expensive. But there's other ways, as you said, there's other ways to get involved too. Knocking on doors, there's yard signs, putting those up. Our last two events we've gone to, all of our yard signs have been taken as we've just gotten them. So there's a great amount of energy out there, and it's really fun. We're having a blast.
Yeah, it's an exciting time, and governor's races are extremely important to freedom. I mean, that executive branch has a leadership role in deciding how big will government get, how much will we allow to take place within our state, and ultimately, what is the agenda for restoring the family within our given state. So thank you so much, Bill, for joining us for this interview and for being on the campaign trail for Kansas's next governor. And we look forward to following along and helping you get the word out.
Hey, thank you so much. And thanks for all the support. And again, just thanks for the work that you guys are doing. It's really critical.
Absolutely. Talk soon.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.